The rest of the country, and what imperfect self-defense does is if you're convicted of murder, it mitigates the murder down to manslaughter. So instead of looking at life, you're looking at 20, maybe you get out in 7, 8 years. You started as a 17-year-old kid, you're out in your mid-20s, you still have a life to live. Manslaughter sucks, but it's a lot better than a murder conviction. And in most states, how imperfect self-defense works is you had a genuine fear of deadly force harm from somebody and you killed them in self-defense, but your fear was objectively unreasonable. It was kind of a panic reaction, for example. That can't qualify as perfect self-defense and get you an acquittal because perfect self-defense has to be reasonable, but it can mitigate murder down to manslaughter.
So let's say there's like an old white guy and he's like seriously like 75.
I think we just had a case like this where an old white guy, a young black gentleman came up to his door. Right?
That's what I was going to ask.
Yep.
He got into a car accident and he jogged up to the door to ask for help and he was injured and the old man feared this, panicked, think he was going to be robbed or whatever, right, and shot the guy.
Yep.
Through the door, wasn't it?
I think it was through the door.
Well, in the case I'm thinking of, the young black man thought he was at someone's house to pick up his brother.
Oh, that was a different one.
Right.
That one.
That guy shot through the door.
Yeah, but that kid, like, the report for that is that he knocked on the door.
Yeah.
I kind of think he probably opened the door, thinking like
he definitely had his hand his hand on the handle. Yeah.
So how would that? So let's do that story because the one where the guy runs into the house that was really sad. He got into a car accident.
Yeah.
He was injured. And he was jogging up to the house to get help because he needed to call somebody, and they panicked and shot him or something like that. In that story that you mentioned, where he went to the wrong house, how did that one play out?
The old man took a plea, and then before he could be sentenced on the plea, he died.
Oh wow!
Yeah. If you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself or your family, the good news is that if you defended lawfully, you can be very hard to convict. But did you defend lawfully? Because if you don't know where the actual legal boundaries for self-defense are, it's the easiest thing in the world to innocently step over them, and now you're extremely easy to convict. Good news. In just a single day, you can become an expert on the law of self-defense and make yourself extremely hard to convict. On Saturday, April 26th, I'm holding one of my only twice-a-year full-day Law of Self-Defense advanced classes. This class is taught live by me and live streamed to you. It teaches you everything you need to know in one day, and there's plenty of opportunity for personal Q&A with me as well. Even more good news, when you register today, you save yourself 50% off the standard registration, but that discount ends soon. Your 50% discount and many more details on this advanced class are available just by pointing your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/advanced today. And I'll also drop that link in the description. I look forward to seeing all of you there.
Well, so then my question with this is, I feel like on the internet, the right has largely made their determination. In fact, I have a poll. Let me see if I can pull this up. Let me try and, I should have pulled it up earlier. I asked what the penalty should be for Carmelo Anthony. And this is among my followers. So, take that in consideration. With 55,939 votes, 42.3% said death penalty, 32.1% said life in prison, 18.5% said 25 years, 7.1% said less than 25 years. I'm curious your thoughts, all of you guys, on based on what we think we know happened from these reports and the witness statements. What do you think is what should be happening right now, and what would the penalty be?
What should be happening right now? What do you mean by that?
Like, I'm not saying if there isn't, like, what is the normal process by which the arrest happens? Like, what should be playing out in the courts? How would this normally be handled? If it wasn't a high profile case, if it was just like two kids in Chicago, what would be happening right now? Like, they're going to go to pretrial hearings? Like,
yeah. So that's what'll happen. So now he's been bailed out. There'll be months and months and months of pretrial hearings. There'll be in limiting motions to exclude certain kinds of evidence. There'll be motions to bring in certain kind of expert witnesses. Ideally, by the time the trial actually starts, by the time a jury is seated, everybody should know, the lawyers should know exactly what legal arguments and what evidence is going to be presented. There should be no surprises for them. It's all supposed to be basically scripted out ahead of time. The only thing that's happening in the courtroom really is it's kind of a theatrical presentation to the jury. Yeah. They're the ones seeing it all for the first time. So they call it preliminary hearings, like preliminary sounds unimportant. This is where the legal battlefield for that trial is being defined. Like it's like a football field being painted out. This is where the rules are, what you're allowed to argue, what witnesses you're allowed to have. This actually largely determines the outcome of the trial, all these preliminary hearings.
So based on, we'll clarify your guys' view in a second, but like based on how you guys view what went down, what do you think the penalty for Carmelo Anthony should be?
You know, I have to be honest, I don't really do sentencing stuff.
Then what would your assumption be on what a court would prescribe for this crime?
Typically, it would be 20 to life.
20 to life?
Yeah.
Wow.
Often without possibility of early release.
So, wow.
Yep.
But what does that really turn into? Does it always actually...
If it's life without possibility of early release, you're in there forever.
But 20 to life, right?
So it varies a lot by states because different states have different rules about how much they can reduce it before you're eligible for parole. Some it's a third. You only do a third and you're eligible.
Yeah.
So a 20-year sentence could be 7 years and then you're out.
What do you think? You're the cop.
25 to life, eligible for parole. Right now, if they determine later on that it was like he went up to a group of friends and said, I'm going to go over there and start some shit.
Life.
Probably.
Premeditation.
I mean, it's Texas, so they're a little more heavy-handed than New York, who has a catch and release program. Ask me how I know. And
we're not fans.
Yeah. Thanks, Governor Kathy Hochul. And so if this is, this is Texas. In New York, I would say probably
he'd be let out right away, and they'd apologize to him.
Pretty much, they'd give him an iPad and a cell, and
here's a new knife.
Yeah, here's a new shiv, and then they let him stab a corrections officer. Yeah, I'd say like 20 to life, maybe 20 to 40 years. He'd probably get parole in about 15, and he'd be on the streets on parole for like 15, 20 years until probably 45. He'd be clean, absolutely nothing by 45.
How do you guys view this? Like the story, what happened?
What do you mean?
Like, how would you describe what happened based on what we know? Just like, and why it warrants 20 to 40 or 20 to life? Like, what happened? Like, what do you think happened?
Two high school students got into a momentary beef with each other. One grabbed the other one, and the other one stabbed him in the heart. I don't think it's really much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Do you think that?
We've all been to high school, right? We've all gotten into fights in high school. Well, except none of us got stabbed in the heart. But
high school had guns.
It's the most common thing in the world.
Yeah.
Well, then, I guess it seems clear cut.
Except the stabbing part. That's
what. I mean, my only, and this kind of shifts the direction a little bit, but I think when we look at the campaign and the amount of money that it's raised, what we've seen with campaigns like this is that they are driven by media sensationalism. And so I wouldn't have expected a campaign to this campaign in that fact base level thing to raise nearly this type of money. It's because of the outrage on the other side, particularly on the right, that I think is fueling this. I think these donations is being fueled by people that are saying, look at what they're saying, what the right is saying in these scenarios where they allowed campaigns for Derek Chauvin and all these other people. It was the same thing that drove Daniel Penny's, the amount of money Daniel Penny raised, 3 point whatever million, was because the mainstream media immediately created a black and white narrative and ran with it. And then the right, these things are fueled by the media narratives around it.
Yeah, I mean, no one's donating because they're calculating what they think the legal defense is going to cost, and they want to make sure he has that much money, right? Each individual's donating largely on an emotion-driven basis.
Yeah, I've read the comments. Some of them are disgusting.
So we have a question from Chad Smith. He says, Texas recognizes imperfect self-defense. Impact?
Well, unfortunately for Anthony, the version of imperfect self-defense that Texas recognizes is different than the rest of the country. The rest of the country, and what imperfect self-defense does is if you're convicted of murder, it mitigates the murder down to manslaughter. So instead of looking at life, you're looking at 20, maybe you get out in 7, 8 years. You started as a 17-year-old kid, you're out in your mid-20s, you still have a life to live. Manslaughter sucks, but it's a lot better than a murder conviction. And in most states, how imperfect self-defense works is you had a genuine fear of deadly force harm from somebody and you killed them in self-defense, but your fear was objectively unreasonable. It was kind of a panic reaction, for example. That can't qualify as perfect self-defense and get you an acquittal because perfect self-defense has to be reasonable, but it can mitigate murder down to manslaughter.
So let's say there's like an old white guy and he's like, seriously, like 75.
I think we just had a case like this where an old white guy, a young black gentleman came up to his door. Right?
That's what I was going to ask.
Yep.
He got into a car accident and he jogged up to the door to ask for help and he was injured and the old man feared this, panicked, think he was going to be robbed or whatever, and shot the guy.
Yep.
Through the door, wasn't it?
I think it was through the door.
Well, in the case I'm thinking of, the young black man thought he was at someone's house to pick up
that was
his
a
brother.
different one.
Right.
That one.
That guy shot through the door.
Yeah, but that kid, like, the report for that is that he knocked on the door.
Yeah.
I kind of think he probably opened the door, thinking like
he definitely had his hand. He had his
Right.
hand on the handle. Yeah.
So how would that? So let's do that story because the one where the guy runs into the house that was really sad. He got into a car accident.
Yeah.
He was injured and he was jogging up to the house to get help because he needed to call somebody and they panicked and shot him or something like that. In that story that you mentioned where he went to the wrong house,
Yep.
how did that one play out?
The old man took a plea, and then before he could be sentenced on the plea, he died.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Justice. Cold bitch.
Oh my gosh.
He just died of old age. But that would be a classic case where the jury could believe, all right, this old guy, he legitimately had a fear of death from this young black man trying to get into his house, apparently. But that fear was objectively unreasonable. He should not, a hypothetical reasonable and prudent person would not have had that fear.
Do y'all have any fears that with the selective release of information, the right could be being misled on what happened with the Carmelo Anthony case?
Everybody's misled
Yeah.
in all these cases. It's disinformation all day, especially from the media. Everything the media says about any of these high-profile cases has to be presumed to be misinformation, to be false, to be lies, until proven otherwise. Right. The only thing that counts is the actual evidence, not how it's recounted or how someone describes it, the actual evidence.
So my concern is the adamant nature on the right that this is as we believe it to be. My fear is you've got 33 witnesses who've not given statements or have, and we don't know what those statements are.
Sure.
Yep.
What if 15 of those tell a completely different story and say that Carmelo tried fleeing and, Austin won, or something like that? I really doubt that's the case, considering the two witnesses that are presented in this. But I do have a concern that the right is assuming that I believe there's two witnesses that gave versions of the events that are available in this police report out of 35.
Right. Listen, there is evidence that could develop that could make this self-defense, or at least look a lot more like self-defense. So if Austin Metcalf greatly outweighed Carmelo Anthony, which could be the case, right? They're reporting...
So
I'm suspicious of that weight number for Carmelo Anthony because I think it was from an outdated ID, and teenagers grow a lot, over a short period of time. But say there was a real disparity of size and strength, and Austin Metcalf grabbed him and then said, "I'm going to beat you to death." Well, that's a different scenario then. Then there may be a reasonably perceived imminent threat of deadly force harm, because deadly force harm doesn't just mean force that can kill you. It means force that can cause you serious bodily injury, a maiming type of injury, or broken bone. That would justify the use of deadly defensive force. The trouble is we don't have any evidence like that yet. And Carmelo Anthony himself, he says things to the police, and he does not say anything like that. He doesn't say he was in fear for his life. He doesn't recite any facts that would reasonably be perceived as a deadly force threat from Austin Metcalf.
I think the quote from Officer Eduardo was,
he touched me, he grabbed me.
The first thing he said was, quote, "I was protecting myself." The next thing he said was, quote, "He put his hands on me." The next thing he said was, "I'm not alleged, I did it." Mm-hmm. The next thing he says after that is, quote, "He put his hands on me, I told him not to." Sounds like this kid grossly overestimated what he was allowed to do in that circumstance based on these
Well,
things.
for example, he definitely had a right to defend himself against the contact from Austin Metcalf. Austin Metcalf was arguably committing simple battery. That's a crime. You can defend yourself against simple battery. You just can't do it with deadly force.
So to the point about the weight you were saying, according to the arrest report, he's 5'9", 130 pounds. That's a BMI of 19.1. I looked up. But I got 19.2. But I got to be honest, 5'9", 130 seems really frail.
That does.
Unreasonably
very,
frail.
Very frail. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So I agree. I don't believe that's correct.
Yeah.
You know, I 5'9", maybe 140, 150, maybe 150. The arguments I've
I
seen
mean, we're going to get an autopsy report eventually.
on Metcalf.
I'm on Metcalf. Right.
I believe already the statements were that he had like 30 pounds on him or something. That's what the argument from the left has been, I think.
And listen, 30 pounds is a lot. So if you do any kind of combat sports like wrestling or something like that, they separate you into
weight
levels
class.
by 8-pound gradations, right? So this would
even
be
less, 5 pounds.
like even less.
Yeah.
So it can make a difference, but we also have to consider the what we call, the lawyers call, the totality of the circumstances. This wasn't a back alley at 3 o'clock in the morning. This was a crowded environment. There's lots of people around. It's hard to believe they're all going to stand there and watch Austin Metcalf beat Carmelo Anthony to death in front of them. I mean, this is not going to end up being a sustained beating.
Yeah. Well, I think, Tim, to what you were saying earlier about the right's reaction to this, I think it points to this element that's running through society on both sides. I particularly because I thought, I lean to the right, I'm conservative, that these are some of my values in the campaigns and the support that we had, that the right was just as principled as the left. And what we've seen is the moment that the tables turn, all of a sudden, the same principles of free speech, of presumption of innocence that they championed loudly for these other cases, they've thrown out the window. Literally, just like, nope, I don't care about those things. It's fascinating to me. And it's just like this narcissism, this pride that's developed within our culture because we do have a phone and we think we have all the information at our fingertips. It's unfortunate. I think it goes to deeper issues within our society, but it's amazing to see it just as strong on the right as it was on the left and is on the left.
So actually the left is arguing, and I do not believe this is correct, that Austin Metcalf was 6'1" and 225 pounds, and that is, I'm going to go ahead and say, absolutely false. I've seen nothing to corroborate any of that, but that's the viral claim all over the internet. Newsweek says that his profile lists him as 6 foot. Really? Newsweek is reporting he was 6 foot 225.
He looks big in the picture. He looks like a heavy set kid.
Okay. Newsweek says this. Newsweek says Metcalf was listed on the Frisco Memorial High School Huddle. He was listed on Huddle as 6 feet 225. I thought he was 5'9", 160. That's what I had been seeing. Newsweek says he was 6 foot 225.
Regardless of what's true, certainly the more there is a disparity of size and the weight and power, the more favorable it's going to be for Carmelo Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you guys know that that's what was reported? I did not know this.
No.
Do you think that plays a role?
It plays a role, sure.
It's going to.
Does it change your view in any way?
No.
I just don't see it. Again, if this was an alley at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's no bystanders and you're worried about suffering a sustained beating by someone who outweighs you by 50 pounds, yeah, I could imagine that being a realistic threat.
Not a track meet surrounded by 500
track meet
people
with families and fathers and mothers. And again, they're not going to stand there and watch a beating to the death happen in front of them.
Mm. If I'm not mistaken, I think
there's a bunch of coaches.
There's like 3 videos that they've collected already.
Right.
Yeah, there's apparently there's more than that.
A school track meet with high schoolers and their phones. Yeah, I probably live streamed it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and they did grab everybody's phone. The police did. That's in the police report.
Well, they're definitely. This is what the defense is going to do.
Yeah, this is what they have to do. Mm-hmm. Again, they have to craft an answer to that question. Was our client reasonably perceiving an unlawful imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury? The answer to that has to be yes in some form. So they have to take the evidence and they have to, like Lego blocks, and they have to build it into a narrative of innocence consistent with self-defense. I will point out, it's not their job to prove self-defense. It's the job of the prosecution to disprove self-defense beyond any reasonable doubt. So the defense doesn't have to show to the jury, hey, we have 80% evidence it was self-defense, or even 50%, or even 30%. They just have to say, listen, there's a reasonable doubt this could have been self-defense, and that's supposed to be an acquittal.
Having just learned that, again, what I had read before was that he was 5'9", 160. And I was like, oh, he's a high school athlete, so he's got some muscle on him, and this kid's not, or whatever. 6 foot, I'm imagining a scenario where he's sitting under a tent, this big guy comes up, and he thinks he's going to be justified in the event dude tries to touch him to use lethal force because of the disparity in size.
And he could be right. If there's a sufficient disparity of size.
What I mean to say is, I could be totally wrong on this. I'm just saying, in my mind, what I see is Anthony sitting there, and when he sees this big dude come up to him, he's thinking, if this guy tries to fight me, I'll be allowed to use a knife. He was thinking, like, I'm not going to try and run away. I'm not going to de-escalate. This guy can't touch me because I can do what I want.
It's certainly possible Carmelo Anthony believes that what he did was lawful self-defense.
I'm not saying that I think he thought in his mind what he was doing was self-defense. I think he thought the perception of it.
Oh, how other people would perceive it.
Right. Like, I don't have to get up. This big dude can't push me around. I'm allowed to use a knife because he's so big.
And then everyone else will agree that was lawful self-defense. Right. Thanks for watching this highlight segment of our full-length law self-defense live stream. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to give us a like and subscribe for more expert analysis on politics, law, and how to be hard to convict. And to watch the full-length episode of this show, just click right here. Stay safe.